Manhattan, 1991. A man punched Mike Tyson in the face at a nightclub. He was 6 feet 3 inches, 240 pounds, and had been in fights his whole life. He thought the crowd, the noise, and the darkness would protect him. He thought wrong. What Tyson did in the next 3 seconds didn't make headlines. No arrests, no lawsuit, no viral footage. Just a story that spread through every nightclub in New York for the next decade. Told in whispers by people who were there and can't forget what they saw. This is that story. The man's fist connected with Mike Tyson's jaw before anyone in that nightclub even realized what was happening. 1 second the music was pounding, strobe lights cutting through cigarette smoke, 200 people moving on the dance floor. The next second, a 6 foot 3 inch man named Ray had just done something that almost nobody on earth had ever voluntarily done. He had punched Mike Tyson in the face, in public, in front of witnesses, on purpose. For exactly 3 seconds, the entire VIP section of that Manhattan nightclub went completely silent. What happened inside those 3 seconds would become a story told in every club, every gym, and every barbershop in New York for the next 10 years. A story nobody put on the news. A story Ray spent years trying to make people forget. A story Mike Tyson never once confirmed or denied. This is that story. And if you want more untold Mike Tyson moments like this one, the ones that never made headlines, subscribe right now and hit the bell. We drop these every single day, now. To understand how a man ended up throwing a punch at the most dangerous person in any room he had ever walked into, we need to go back to the beginning of that night. It was the summer of 1991. Mike Tyson was 25 years old, and his life outside the ring had become more complicated than anything he faced inside it. His marriage was fracturing under the weight of press attention, competing loyalties, and the particular kind of loneliness that comes from being the most famous athlete in the world. His training had become inconsistent. His focus, the cold, terrifying focus that Cus D'Amato had spent years drilling into him, was harder to locate than it used to be. But on this particular Tuesday night, none of that mattered. Mike just wanted 3 hours where nobody asked him anything. No interviews, no handlers, no obligations. Just music, low lighting, and the feeling of being a 25-year-old in New York City who happened to have the night off. He came to the club with 2 friends from his old neighborhood, not security, not an entourage, just 2 guys he had known since before any of this, back when he was a kid in Brownsville with no money and too much anger, and a trainer who believed in him when nobody else did. Coming with them felt like putting on an old coat, familiar, warm, real. The club was on the west side of Manhattan, one of those places that did not advertise, did not need to, where the door policy was so selective that getting in was its own status signal. Leather booths along the walls, a raised VIP section overlooking the dance floor, bartenders who moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had seen everything and been impressed by none of it. Mike's group was taken to a table in the VIP section without being asked for anything. The host recognized him immediately and did not make a production of it, which Mike appreciated. He ordered a drink, settled into the booth, and for about 45 minutes, the night was exactly what he had come for. Then Ray walked in. Ray was the kind of man who needed every room to know he had arrived. 31 years old, heavy-set but solid, with the particular confidence of someone who had won enough bar fights to believe he was genuinely dangerous. He was not, but he did not know that yet. He had been drinking before he got to the club. Not stumbling drunk, but the specific kind of drunk that peels away the thin layer of judgment that usually sits between a man's impulses and his actions. He came with a group of 5 or 6 friends, and within 20 minutes of arriving, they had found their way to the bar directly below the VIP section. That is when Ray saw Mike Tyson sitting in the booth above him. Now here's the thing you have to understand about Ray, and about men like Ray, to understand what happened next. Ray had spent his entire adult life measuring himself against other men, not in gyms, not in competition, in rooms, in conversations, in the daily transaction of respect and disrespect that men like him treat as a kind of currency. And in every room Ray had ever entered, he had been one of the biggest, loudest, most physically imposing people present. It was his identity. It was the thing he knew how to be. And Mike Tyson, short, quiet, sitting alone with two friends, not demanding any attention, somehow made all of that feel small without doing a single thing. Ray's friends noticed him staring. One of them said something like, "Don't." Another one laughed. A third one should have grabbed his arm and physically moved him away from the situation, but did not. And Ray, already past the point where good advice lands cleanly, began walking toward the stairs that led up to the VIP section. Mike was mid-conversation with one of his friends when he heard the voice. Tyson." Mike looked up. Ray was standing at the edge of the VIP section, shoulders back, chin up, doing the thing men like him do when they want to signal aggression without technically starting anything yet. "What's good?" Mike said. Not a question. Flat. Patient. The tone of a man who has been through this exact interaction enough times to recognize it immediately and feel genuinely tired of it. "I just wanted to see if you're as tough as they say," Ray said, loud enough that the people nearby could hear, loud enough that his friends below could hear. This was performance as much as confrontation. Mike looked at him for a moment, then looked back at his friends and continued the conversation. Ray stepped closer. "I'm talking to you." One of Mike's friends shifted slightly in his seat, the kind of small movement that means something to people who know what to watch for. Mike turned back to Ray. His expression had not changed, his voice had not changed, but something in the quality of his stillness had changed, the way the air changes right before weather arrives. "Walk away," Mike said. "Enjoy your night." Ray laughed, turned to the people sitting nearby in the VIP section. "You hear this?" A few people looked away. Nobody laughed with him. "I said walk away," Mike said again, quieter this time. And then Ray threw the punch. A right hand, wide and arcing, the kind of punch that works when the other person does not see it coming or does not know how to move. It landed on the left side of Mike Tyson's face, not flush, not perfectly clean, but enough contact that anyone watching knew exactly what had just happened. Someone nearby made a sound that was not quite a gasp and not quite a scream. The music kept playing. The strobe lights kept cutting through the smoke. Mike Tyson stood up. "Before we continue, drop your thoughts in the comments right now. A man just threw the first punch at Mike Tyson in a nightclub. What happens in the next 3 seconds? Tell us what you think before we show you what actually happened." Now, back to the story. Ray had a fraction of a second to process that the punch had landed, that he had done the thing, that there was no version of reality where he could now take it back. His friends below had gone quiet. The people in the VIP section had taken a collective step backward, creating a circle without anyone deciding to create a circle. Mike Tyson, standing now, looked at Ray with an expression that nobody who was present that night would ever be able to adequately describe afterward. Not anger, not adrenaline. Something older than both of those things. The expression of a man who has been training for this since he was 13 years old, and for whom this particular moment, a large, untrained man having just thrown an inaccurate punch, represents nothing more complicated than a problem with a known solution. Mike's right hand moved. One punch, not a combination, not a continuation. Just one punch, short and precise, delivered with the full rotational force of a body that had been built specifically to do exactly this. It connected with the center of Ray's face, and the sound it made was different from the sound Ray's punch had made. Ray's punch had sounded like a slap. Mike's punch sounded like a door closing. Ray's legs left the floor. Not completely, but enough. His body went backward and then down, hitting the edge of the booth behind him before crumpling to the floor in a sitting position. His back against the leather, his eyes open but not focused, his brain attempting and failing to process what had just occurred in the half-second between the punch landing and the world going sideways. The music was still playing. 12 people in the immediate vicinity of that VIP booth had just watched Mike Tyson take a punch and respond with a single counter so fast that several of them would later argue about whether they had actually seen it or had only seen the result of it. Mike sat back down. He picked up his drink. His two friends from Brownsville looked at him. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then one of them, very quietly, said, "You good?" "Yeah," Mike said. Ray was still sitting on the floor. One of his friends had come up the stairs and was now crouching next to him, saying his name, trying to get a response. Ray's eyes were blinking slowly, the strobe lights of the club reflecting off them in a way that made him look like a man watching something very far away. He was not unconscious. Mike had not hit him with full force. People who understood boxing well enough to assess these things would later describe the punch as calibrated, meaning Mike had delivered exactly enough to put Ray on the floor and exactly not enough to put him in a hospital. A distinction that requires a level of control most people who have never trained seriously find impossible to believe is real. It is real. It is, in fact, one of the things that separates a professional from everyone else in the room. The club's security arrived within 90 seconds. They assessed the situation quickly. Ray, sitting on the floor, told them he had slipped. His friends, who had watched him throw the first punch, who had watched Mike Tyson respond with one counter, confirmed this. They were not going to say otherwise. Mike and his group were approached by the club's floor manager, a man named Dennis who had been running events in Manhattan for 15 years and had seen several things he would never fully be able to explain. Dennis told Mike that they were welcome to stay as long as they liked, that he was sorry for any disruption, and that he hoped the rest of the evening would be more relaxed. Mike thanked him, finished his drink, stayed for another hour. Ray was helped out of the club by his friends. He did not press charges. He did not speak to police. He did not speak about it publicly, because there was no version of the story that made him look like anything other than a man who had decided to punch Mike Tyson in a nightclub and received the most predictable consequence imaginable. What Ray did do, in the weeks and months that followed, was think about those 3 seconds constantly. The punch he had thrown had not been bad by his own standards. It had landed. That was more than most men could say. But Mike had not moved the way Ray expected a person to move when they get hit. He had not flinched or grabbed the side of his face or taken a step back. He had stood up, and something in the way he stood up had told Ray, in the fraction of a second before the counter arrived, that he had made a very significant error in judgment. He had thought size meant something. He had thought throwing the first punch meant something. He had thought being 6 feet 3 inches and 240 pounds and willing to start a fight in a nightclub made him the most dangerous person in the room. In most rooms, in most situations, throughout his entire adult life, he had been right about that. In this room, on this night, he was wrong. And the correction had arrived in a single punch so precisely placed that Ray would describe it years later, to someone he trusted, late at night, in the way men sometimes finally tell the truth about the things that change them. Not as painful, but as final. Like a door closing on a version of himself that had believed certain things about how the world worked. After that night, those beliefs were no longer available to him. He still went to bars. He still carried himself with the weight of a man who had been in fights. But he stopped walking into rooms and immediately searching for the biggest person in them, measuring himself against them, deciding what that measurement meant. He had done that once, one night in Manhattan, and he knew now exactly what that measurement produced. The story spread through New York nightlife the way stories spread in those years, through bartenders and bouncers and DJs who told their regulars, through regulars who told their friends, through friends who told people in other cities when they traveled. It was never reported. There was no footage. No names were ever confirmed publicly. But everyone who heard it, in whatever version they heard it, came away with the same understanding. A man walked into a Manhattan nightclub and decided that the most famous fighter on the planet was someone he needed to test. He threw the first punch. He received one punch in return. He sat on the floor of a VIP section for several minutes, trying to remember where he was. And Mike Tyson picked up his drink and waited for the music to get good again. Nobody in that club forgot what they saw. Nobody who heard the story secondhand forgot what they heard, not because of the violence, which by any objective measure had been minimal, controlled, almost surgical, but because of what it said about the distance between thinking you were dangerous and actually being dangerous. About the difference between being the biggest person in a room and being the most capable person in a room. About what happens when a man who has spent his whole life convincing himself that his size is his power meets, in one single night, the absolute limit of that conviction. Ray learned the lesson he had been avoiding his entire adult life. He learned it in 3 seconds, and the teacher did not even set down his drink before sitting back down. That is the story nobody put on the news. That is the story Mike Tyson never confirmed and never denied. That is what happened the night a man decided to throw the first punch. And now, you know what happened next.